Welcome to another episode of Threads of Enlightenment. As usual, this is my space of honor. And I like to take this time to thank our guests because I know they're coming with some things that I call very expensive, priceless, if you will, time. Kimberly is here to spend some of the beautiful, priceless commodity we call time. How we utilize our 24 hours will say much about who we are. The other is the journey housed who we were and created who we are. And Kimberly's here to share both of those precious things. And so we want to honor her and create a space by which she has a chance to become. And we welcome you here at Threads of Enlightenment. And thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. It's totally my honor to be here.
It is mine as well to have you here. Tell the folks how do you serve mankind? Because I tell them that we are creators, one. And number two, I tell them the ultimate prize is to serve someone from your heart. That is without expecting anything, is one of the most purest form of giving and love expression that you'll ever see. So how do you serve while you're here on this planet?
So I serve, like many do, from my own experience and from a really young age, and we can get into some of those stories if it's appropriate. I had an experience that the ineffable, that source, I call it beloved, is at my very center. And the more I open up to that part of myself, that in which I live and move and have my being, the more I open up to that, the more I discover who I am, the more I find myself resourced to live in this world that is filled with all sorts of beauty and challenge, pleasure and loss. We have a very complex experience here on earth. And I have discovered the more I open up to that part of myself and those that I serve, the more they open up and live from that place, the more their lives have qualities of insight, compassion, freedom, joy, and all the qualities that really make us happy. So I serve in that way, and it takes many forms. I work with individuals and groups in a number of different ways.
Oh, that is excellent. I cannot wait to delve into this conversation and get a little deeper, as they say. One of our customs here, Kimberly, is to go back and revisit the place we call home. It is one of the first space by which we reside for several years. We have these two folks that are called mom and dad. I tell people from time to time, these scientists that are about to experiment from their thesis and begin to deposit data into us. Just bring us into that space. What was that unit like, that time of family when you were here on this planet?
So my family, at core, I always experienced from childhood on a great sense of innocence in my family. There was a quality of my mom and dad. I could see them on a soul level, um, looking to live their lives from a place of charity
Mm-hmm.
and strong devotion. There was a deep love for us, and within that, as the foundation, we had wonderful things that happened and we had challenging things that happened. Loss was probably a very strong experience in my life from a very young child.
Yeah.
Loss,
How,
unexpected loss on a bigger level.
as a young child, Kimberly, how did you manage your loss on a big level? How did you move? How did you exist? Day one, day two, day three. How did you move?
Yes. So what happened for me, and that's what influences my own service so much, is when I was 3, I felt very close to my grandma,
Mm-hmm.
and she died of cancer. And I was with her in her final days. And I still remember that she was glowing. She was in so much pain, but she was glowing.
Mm-hmm.
And there was something about being there with her that opened me up to an experience that life is much more than our bodies.
Yeah.
So I experienced this pain and this sadness of losing her. In fact, even in my teens, I've cried because I thought, oh, if she were here, we'd be holding hands right now. And at the same time, she kind of took me with her.
Yeah.
There was a closeness. When she did pass, there was something in me that broke open in an awareness of what I was beyond my body. And then when I was 4, I almost lost my mom. She got very sick. And it was not cognitive. So I wasn't, as a 3 and a 4-year-old, processing it like we do as adults, where I'm reflecting or getting into a support group or knowing how to express my emotions. I didn't have those skills, but I had an awareness of being held by something larger, something that was nameless. And it was indescribable, the consolation that was. And it led me to a formative experience when I was 5 or 6. And it was out in nature. We were Catholic, and I used to love going to church. I loved ritual, and I have always loved everything that sets us up for an experience of the divine. And I would love autumn in Ohio, and I would love walking home from school, and the leaves are changing in the air. And one time I was walking home from school, and nature became all alive to me. Everything was dancing.
Yeah.
The wind, the trees. And so I started dancing home. I was whirling. No dervish, but I was whirling home. And I was caught in this wordless, timeless bliss.
Yeah.
And I was standing at the end of my cul-de-sac, and as I was standing there, a tree caught my attention, like the tree was speaking to me, it just reached out for me. And then as I was caught in this tree, I was like in awe. Then one leaf caught my attention, and I was riveted into the experience of that leaf. And the leaf began, it was orangish yellow, and it began teetering on its branch. And then unexpectedly it broke off the branch and began its descent down to the earth. And unsolicited by me, a part of unconscious within me came up, and I had this deep anguish. Is that all life is about? Moving towards death? It was a direct, and I know that was prompted because of the loss, because of the elements of losing my grandma and of the tenuousness that came into our home when I almost lost my mom. And it posited itself there unseen by me, but it came up. And right when it came up within me, and I was so little, so I wouldn't have known how to look at it or let it move or understand, have the tools. Right when it came up, time stopped. And it was like veils parted, and I had this experience that the leaf was in God and God was in the leaf. And that all life, and my life, it was very personal, was about one thing, and that was being and becoming in this ineffable source. And what happened is it freed me of all concern around death. It was gone. It's never come back. It's completely gone. And it simultaneously filled me with joy. So much joy that I was like, oh my gosh. It was like having the best ice cream. You're like, this is the best ice cream. You just want to share it with your friends. Like, have you had this rocky road? It is so delicious. And it was an overflow. And I connected the dots then. I was like, oh, I get it. This adventure of life is all about this.
Yeah.
And it didn't free me from challenges. It didn't free me from continual healing of various traumas. It didn't free me from the necessity of growth. But what it did is it oriented me in an unchanging worldview that's still operative today, wherein we can navigate this world. And then as the overflow of that and the continuing growth in my own life, I've just grown to have an immensity of perspective changing and tool toolbox that has worked for me that I can share with others. Because when we experience those moments, and individuals can doubt they have experienced those moments, they can hear that story and think, oh, I've never experienced that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But actually, when we look more deeply, each one of us has had pretty dramatic, timeless experiences. They've maybe gotten shrouded under
Yeah.
stress,
I agree.
and we can rediscover those, and then we are set free.
Yeah. I don't know if it's designed not to keep us from trouble, and I think all of those things are designed. The hard times are designed uh, to make us even more aware of the greatness and the deepness of ourselves. Because I always tell people when they're talking to me about their current situation, and I would say to them, tell me of a situation you were in once. And what happened? Look at you now, where you are. And remember, I would say, then remember that when you did not think there's a way out, yet here you are sitting
Mm.
talking with me, and
I
you
love
found the way out. And I said, you will find the way out here as well. You are that deep. Don't allow your present circumstances, I would say, people, do not allow your desperations to make you desperate. You will lose their way. So here's this young girl. What profound interaction she has experienced in so many different ways: death, awakening, and knowledge about life, and all of these things. The dance that is a part of one's way. I still dance, Kimberly. I put on the music, I close my eyes, and I dance, and I allow that expression to move me through all kinds of different states. And so I invite people to keep dancing. So here's this young girl. She experienced this at such a young age. As she's now looking and she's moving through life, Emily, and she's looking into her future, if you will, having those profound encounter. What and where did she start heading, and why did she pick that path as she's moving in her life?
right? And that's such a great question, right? Because it lets us come back to the essence
Yeah.
of our own soul journey.
Yeah.
And I do believe that each of us is a soul, and that we
Oh,
are
yes.
having a journey, and that
I
there is
agree.
a intentionality around this journey. Uh, well, in those experiences, and there were many at that time period, I had this one desire, and that is that to be of service to this awakening process.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed that I was of my time and culture. So for quite a long time, I found a home and a place within my own Catholic tradition,
Mm-hmm.
because that was the natural setup that was
Yeah.
life-giving,
Yeah.
coming from where I was coming. And I love that because it was so formative. I mean, that particular tradition, which I'm no longer of, is so juicy with mysticism. You know, all religions have their human side that, has the dark and the light, right?
Yes. Yes. The
The awakened
beauty
and the ignorant
of who we are. Yeah.
happening. It's because we're evolving. Uh, and but I found a great source of an occasion for a magnified experience of my soul and of the divine.
Yeah.
And before I really could name where am I going and ask those questions, I went through a very, very dark night in my teens,
Yeah.
where a lot of collective consciousness, some of my own unworked out trauma, a lot of ideologies that I was meant to work through
Mm-hmm.
cast a shadow on me. And I wondered why I was here, because I'm a very passionate person on all levels. passionate with pouring myself out into life, passionate around ideas, passionate around sensuality. Everything was passionate. And I developed this doubt that that was spiritual.
Yeah.
And we as a humanity grapple with that, right?
Yeah.
The sacred and the profane, the taboo of passion, the suspicion that is meant. And I came through that dark night having an experience, an ineffable experience that washed me of that. And after 2.5 years of hell, it washed me of it. And I realized that to be passionate is of the divine. It's of the divine.
It is
Desire
necessary.
is.
It is a part of the design for the individual. Here you are, because I am familiar with that space, with the teaching of the some belief systems, and when you are have all these passions, and one because of having these passions and the teaching, there's this dichotomy that causes a great deal of guilt that comes on one and
Mm-hmm.
engulfs one's being and create a dark place that one is spinning out of control because of the kindness of their heart. They want, and they have these two aspects of themselves, and this battle is going on. How did you overcome that? What was the situation that caused you to be washed, if you will, and you were able to then move through that pain?
So it's a beautiful, complex answer. I had a near-death experience, which is a whole other interview
Yeah,
in
I
and
had
of
one
itself.
too. It's a totally different thing. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That'll change you, all right.
That'll change you, right?
Yeah, I was there.
And that that washed everything.
Yeah.
When I came back into my body, what I saw was part of my soul journey
Yeah.
was to choose to enter into a lot of healing modalities.
Hmm.
I did traditional psychotherapy. I got into a lot of holistic things. I opened up to my core place of healing because I am actually a healer as well. They've
Yeah.
been natural gifts since I was very young. But my core gifts were meditation, contemplation, laying on of hands, and energy work with myself
Hmm.
and with others. And what I did is I gave a really big yes to that. And
Yeah.
I saw that part of my soul journey was, yes, these instantaneous experiences, but also the yes that stays constant in the vigilance for the development
Yeah.
of my journey. And I took a good 3 intense years of devoting myself to giving myself into all these different modalities. And then that then erupted into a lot more mystical experiences, which then led me to the monastery. And in the monastery, living in silence and chanting and meditating day in and day out and living off the land was one of the greatest sources of transformation for me. It was a setup to encounter the source at the center. It developed my skillfulness to hear
Here.
where spirit is,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
in others, for
Hmm.
myself, in life, to participate in a much more psychic and intuitive way with the movement in the world and the cosmos.
Yeah.
And then eventually to emerge in 2001 to be of service the past 22 years. So it was complex in that I've got the dramatic experiences that were instant, but then I've got the overflow of that leading me into the yes to what we might call the more systematic systems and modalities we have that are right here before us as
Yes.
tools to our journey, as supports. to our journey. We're solitary by nature, but we're not meant to walk alone in that solitary journey.
I absolutely believe. I tell people about the fact that one must be um, independent to go through one's walk independently. But once you've done that, the greater design is to be interdependent. And one must do one in order to be in the other, because when you go through the independent walk, a part of the independent walk is preparing you for the interdependent walk. And so, as you had moved through yours, because some of the tools that I brought into my space were just the same that you did. I began to seek knowledge. I began to bring in meditation. Meditation, I tell people, is one of the most powerful tools that you will ever bring into your space, because it teaches you so much. It teaches you to be quiet, which is powerful, but in that silence, it can be loud. And so you have to learn how
Yeah.
to walk within that um, that loudness, and I have to learn how to quiet that, because I tell people, until you have spent time in a place of solitude, you don't know who you are. And because it's in that place of solitude, in that meditation, that you learn how to listen. There's certain skill set that you're developing while you're there. You learn how to be present. You learn how to walk in from the natural into the supernatural. And you're doing it by that breath. And I tell people that breath is the bridge
Yeah.
into the supernatural. Until you begin to do those things, you are missing so much. You get in touch with, as Kimberly said, the the source of power, the source of us all. Um, some people call him the source. I call him Father. He is the center of it, and you connect. And when you connect, he will teach you so much about who you are. And then once you learn who you are going to be able to then become that servant where you are able to bow and humble yourself before another and offer you to them. And that is one of the most beautiful, I think, honorable space to be in. So here you are, Kimberly. What a powerful story to spend and have all of that time to be there learning about who you are, and then even going beyond that and getting into a monastery. And the another thing that I tell people, the chanting, the constant humming is
Right.
that
Right.
music that centers us, and also it carries us into the next realm in even deeper. You
Yes.
marry those two with your meditation and that the chanting and stuff like that. I've been in a monastery, and when you walk in there, it's like the power is just lifting you as you're walking, getting
Palpable, isn't
closer.
it?
It is absolutely something else that you experience when you're there. And to have all of that, um, Kimberly, that is absolutely powerful. Now, talk to us, because sitting in that power, what were some of those things and that you started discovering about you? What were some of those tangible spiritual things that you drank and partake of as you learned about you?
Thank you. Right. And to also jump on the coattails of what you shared, it is true, in silence, in solitude, we really come face to face with ourselves.
Oh, yeah.
And while I entered the monastery, because I was really on fire with love for God, I mean, I was
Mm-hmm.
completely taken. I was feeling pursued. I was feeling desired. I
Yeah.
was desiring. So there was a great impetus. I wasn't seeking I entered because I was found and I wanted
Yeah.
more.
Yeah.
And while I was there, one of the things I was looking forward to was encountering myself.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you're living all day long in silence and your only sounds are chant and nature, we talked once a day
Yeah.
in the evenings. You show up. All the parts of you you don't necessarily are in contact with all start to show up, show up,
Yeah.
show up. And I loved that because there were no excuses.
Yeah.
In our society, we start to encounter ourselves and then we can turn on the radio.
Mm-hmm.
Or we start
Yeah.
to encounter ourselves and then we may blame our situation. Or
Mm-hmm.
we start to show up and then we feel overwhelmed and we bury it down and we go into, going out to a party and drinking a
Yeah.
lot. Or
Yeah.
there's all sorts of mechanisms we do to deal with the fear that arises when we start to encounter ourselves.
Yeah.
And that fear leaves us with the misconception that we are powerless in the face of what is unknown within ourselves.
Yeah.
And what I experienced was actually, I am the resting place of the greatest power. It
Yes.
is right within me. So even the devotion that had the I thou, we were chanting to God
Mm-hmm.
a lot. We were having this exchange back and forth. What happened was naturally more and more was the direct experience of the I thou disappearing. And then in that there was just being.
Yeah.
And it would erupt very specifically. I remember, I won't tell the whole story because of the timing of our show, but there was a really dramatic healing I had numerous times. But one was there was a cosmic setup that led to a great misunderstanding that triggered me on a really deep level in relation to authority. And
Mm-hmm.
in it, I felt very, very powerless.
Yeah.
Oh, she thinks I'm not charitable. It hit this deep chord of I'm not loving. I'm not
Yeah.
loving. I'm seen as not loving. And I was in such angst. And
Mm-hmm.
here I was caught in the silence, and I wrestled with it. First, I was angry. Then I was sad. Then I felt powerless. Then I blah, 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 blah,
Yeah.
blah. I went through all of that. And what I decided to do was to just hold myself like you would hold a baby
Yeah.
and just just be there with it. Just be there. Not try to be where I wasn't.
Yeah.
There were these little inclinations. Like I had this little guilt statement that came up in that healing. It's like, well, if you were more holy, you wouldn't be feeling this way. And then I'd shift back to presence
Yeah.
and shift back to presence and hold and hold and hold. And as I held myself out of nowhere, an unconscious memory came forward that was very benign. It was something that was said by one of my parents that was not directed towards me, that was not hurtful, but I internalized it
Mm-hmm.
and it developed a doubt that I was a loving person. And what happened is that memory came forward and I felt my little girl had sunk in that moment
Yeah.
and bought a truth that wasn't true. And it was implicit. It wasn't
Yeah.
even something passed on to me verbally, like you are this. Nothing
Yeah.
like that. It was just me internalizing and twisting something. As I held that misconception, I had an experience that took me to a completely different level. It
Yeah.
had nothing to do with being loving or not being loving. I had the experience, I am love.
Yeah.
And when that happened, it washed the I am loving, I'm not loving, doubt and misconception. So monastic life was very much like that for me. I had big moments like that. I had small moments.
Yeah.
I had great beauty. And I think the little bit I've just gotten to know you, I bet you would be right on board that we have no idea how magnificent we are and how beautiful we are and how loved into existence we are.
Yeah.
And we're meant to open up to that vulnerably, to actually receive the affirmation of how loved we are by the eternal.
Yeah.
And in that comes the overflow of it's effortless to pour ourselves out in loving service. So we don't serve because it's the right thing to do first and foremost. We serve, I believe, as the overflow
Mm-hmm.
of the joyous recognition of how we are loved and who we are.
I agree 100%. And
I,
it
I,
is how it was designed to be. And when one lives from that space, it is, oh my God, the flavor of life, the flavor of breathing, the flavor of closing one's eyes and listening to the songs within the wind, the flavor of existence is intensified to such a degree. It's amazing. And when you're there, I believe that's where we're called to be and to call to live from all and every single day of our life. And in order for us to get there, we have to um, surrender. I tell
yeah.
people that is one of the hardest things for a individual to do, is to surrender, because they feel it, they have to do it in their ability, not realizing that when one surrender, that there's a greater ability to take you to a deeper level of who you are, and you will never know that until you surrender. And so, you know, but a lot of people fight that, as you said, and a lot of people in our Western Christianity system are afraid to be by ourselves, afraid and terrified to be by ourselves. And that is why we shun the place of solitude. That is why we shun the place of meditation, because we know that when we get into that space, you're going to run into you. And I tell people that trauma is stored, it's an emotional thing that is stored within you. And if you don't believe me, when that emotion comes up, it may be triggered by a memory like it did with you. And that's how it was triggered with mine. It was triggered by a memory. And when I remembered, I also experienced that emotion. And it was such a powerful emotion that a 20-something-year-old man was running in a corner, walking on a college campus, when it hit me, that memory and that emotion got in, running on a campus to find a place to hide so that I could cry, because that trauma was stored there. And I tell people we have to learn how to let that trauma out of us, release it, so that it no longer has a place in us emotionally and it's not stored there. But when the memory comes and we have released it, we will simply remember that, and it does not have that intense pain anymore, because we have released it. It is not a part of us per se there, but the memory is there, but the sting of that emotion, we have surrendered it. And so here you are, you have gone through so much, you're learning. I love the fact that you're in a monastery. I love that. I remember being there for a little while. It's so powerful. And being
It's
in
so
all of
well.
that power, um, as you are learning and experiencing you, when you became full and you began to step out to release some of this fullness and serve, what began to happen to you, Kimberly, as you were releasing some of you out? Because this vessel of yours is overflowing, and you gotta dump it out so that you don't become, just a recluse hiding somewhere, and not know how to deal with it. So how did you, when you began to make those steps, what did it look like, and what was happening to you, because you're still learning of you, even though you're serving. What was happening
Right.
to you as you're doing that when you take those steps and moving forward?
Sure. Well, it's there's many layers of answers to that question. And I think where I'm feeling drawn to speak to is I've always found for myself and for anybody that I've gotten to know on any level, the evolution on our path happens in very subtle little ways.
Yep.
I mean, we have these dramatic moments that have a story with them,
Yeah.
and we can hone in on that as a little portal that holds the whole experience. But there are all these little steps and little things that are always happening, always working with us,
Mm-hmm.
always providing a whiff of light and insight and wisdom and healing in that. And when I was a monastic for 10.5 years, and my first 6 years as a monastic, I began to develop to boundless capacity, a connectivity to the world that I felt immediate. So my prayer was immediately involved with people.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a false sense of being separated from the world, but rather that I was in the heart of
Yeah.
the human experience, and everything was present to me. So in that exchange, what unexpectedly happened is after I took vows for life, and here I am outside my
Mm-hmm.
vows for life, I took vows for life. I was asked to join a new community. They were small, and they just needed more nuns.
Yeah.
And so I went down as a young zealous nun. Long story short, I ended up in meditation hearing a phrase, build the permanent monastery. And when I heard that phrase, I gave this massive yes because it was so of the divine.
Yeah.
But I didn't know what it meant.
Yeah.
And how often in our life we get these big inspirations and we just say yes. And then we discover, oh, I didn't know what that meant, like
Yeah.
that my whole life was going to change. But that's how that was. Literally, I ended up building the permanent monastery. Literally,
Wow.
everything kept falling to me. And I ended up having at 29 years old, I
Wow.
ended up having the capacity and the skillfulness to step in as the general contractor, one of the designers, one of the main fundraisers for this 17,000 square foot monastery.
Wow.
And it was incredible because it was miracle after miracle. That's my book that just came out 2 weeks
Yeah.
ago. Miracle after
Congratulations.
miracle. Thank you. Well, it was the tangible evidence of what happens, like you put so well, when we surrender.
Yeah.
As individuals, maybe we're not going to build a monastery, but that surrender leads us into that same level of manifestation, liberation, and greatness in our lives. Our potential can come forward in that moment. So what happened is I began to taste interaction with hundreds and hundreds of people
Mm-hmm.
from this place as a monastic.
Wow.
And unknown to me, I was being fashioned by the divine for about 3.5 years. I
Yeah.
could not have orchestrated it because I thought once the monastery is built, and it was the monastery of my dreams. If I was going to enter
Yeah.
a monastery, it's like, this kind of monastery is what I'd want to be in. I had no idea my next step would be to leave. I had no idea. But there was something of an initiation that happened during that project. And in its, I was I was changed even more. And
Yeah.
when I was changed even more, there was this moment of realization that my time was complete. It was filled with
Yeah.
lots of signs, a hawk,
Mm-hmm.
and a this and a that, which is a beautiful story. But in it, it became really clear because I was so close to myself, I could hear
Yeah.
the divine.
Yeah.
My life was so simple, and I had lived from such a place of surrender that it was easy for me to hear the next step and to know there was nothing else I could do.
Yeah.
I had no wrestling over it. I had the transition that goes from living completely without the stimulation that
Yeah.
is out in the world. I had a transition, but there was no inner doubt ever. And as I stepped forward, I was given a scholarship to go to seminary, to do my grad work. And from there, all I wanted to do was learn the many languages
Mm-hmm.
of the adult journey so that I could hear people when they were speaking
Yeah.
and be of service to their soul and their heart. I didn't want to use just my language. I wanted to hear their language.
Yeah.
So all my education was oriented towards that. And I was guided into it. I had nothing when I left. Oh my gosh, Ken. When I left, I literally had nothing. I had no clothes, no car, no home, nothing. And, you know, the divine kept just, I went to the Salvation Army and they gave me a free day of getting to choose any clothes I wanted.
Yeah.
And it is so funny because I had just left the monastery where I had been shaved head, wearing 5 layers of
Yeah.
clothes. Well, my perception on what clothes to get was very unrealistic. I was like getting these turtlenecks. I was in Florida in July. They're like, you're gonna have a stroke if you get that turtleneck. I'm like, well, I can't show my neck. I'm like, I realized I should have like taken them up on that 6 months later when I had adapted to my arms being out in the sun again.
That is so precious. Isn't it funny how I always tell people that when one is awakened, and that is why I use that terminology awake, because when you are awake to you're never, complacency becomes your enemy. You are not comfortable being in that space of complacency. It rubs you wrong. And so one is always in motion and one is always listening for the instructions and the voice is very quiet. It's just a little direction saying time to move, time to grow some more. And so here you are, you built this beautiful monastery that you want to live in. And while you're doing all of that, you had the beginnings of the nudge that it's time for you to move on. I love that. And so we are called, no, it's beautiful because we are called to a life of obedience. It is, um, it becomes, we call it the walk of faith when one walks in obedience because one becomes a servant and you're constantly living in this awareness to the voice inside that is giving you direction, encouraging you, making you aware of you and making you aware of the others. And so, but you are always attentive to that voice. And that voice said, get to Florida, put on, change clothes, and and here you are, walk you through the process by which you are now, and gave you I call it the lab, and now you're going to sit down and write the thesis, the paper on what you went through the lab. Because I had the same thing in my meditation. I had a phrase, the blueprint of faith, and I wrote it down. I'm like, what does that mean? you know, and I had that in this notebook for several years without doing nothing. And there was an appointed time for me to begin to learn what that meant. And it
Yes.
gave birth to a book about the blueprint of faith. Was about one walking by faith. What is it? What does it look like? How do you do that? All those type of stuff. So I learned all of that. I went through an experience for several years, and then later I wrote it down into a book, The Blueprint of Faith. So I know exactly what you're talking about when you are saying what you went through. So here you are. You've been through all of this, and you are now having this new life where you are called to take off the 5 layers, if you said, and reimagine yourself. What happened,
Right.
Kimberly?
Oh my word. Right. And now we're 22 years into
Yeah.
that chapter. that's had many mini chapters,
Yeah.
subsections in it. I was really taken care of because the scholarship I got was to a international school of formation,
Hmm.
a grad school in Washington, D.C. And I arrived there August 27th of 2001. So you had 9/11 happen
Yeah.
2 weeks later.
Yeah.
I was in a beautiful community of people from all over the world, and it allowed me to hold a much more global view of what was
Yeah.
happening. And I was in the heartbeat, with the multi-faith gatherings and the
Yeah.
marches and the everything orienting towards understanding and peace. And my grad school experience was like gold. It was gold. I
Yeah.
loved it. It was natural. I loved the learning. I was surrounded by beautiful human beings, all at moments of change in their life. Most of them came
Yeah.
there because they were going from one form of service into
Hmm.
something new.
Yeah.
And some knew what it was, and others didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
And they were there. So we were in a very formative moment together, and then went our ways. And I ended up starting, to my surprise, I had actually fallen in love with somebody, and it wasn't a relationship that was meant to be. Looking back, it was obvious at the time. It wasn't obvious.
Yeah.
Uh, I was offered four really, really terrific positions,
Yeah.
and this beautiful man that I fell in love with was only open to the location of
Yeah.
one of them. So I took that one and I stepped into pastoral ministry at a church. It was very progressive. There were two priests. I was still Catholic at the time, even though my formation was very universal. And they accepted me as a minister
Mm.
right with them.
Yeah.
So
Nice.
it was a blank canvas. It was a new community, and I was able to pour myself into service of developing theologically and spiritually the Christ experience.
Yeah.
And then I began serving people all around that area,
Hmm.
in many other churches and communities. And then I began developing a few meditation courses and a personal development course called Connecting to Your Essence that became attended by people of all backgrounds. And with that bridge, what ended up happening was I was 80% within my named tradition and 20% in the broader sphere, if you will.
Yeah.
And then I ended up getting banned and
Wow.
by the bishop
Hmm.
and considered heretical and unorthodox. And I lost all of this. So I went through this other losing time. Loss has
Yeah.
been a big theme in my life dramatically. And then
Yeah.
it launches something new. And I moved 100% into serving people of all backgrounds and making that adjustment within
Yeah.
myself of transitioning from what I consider the formation of my childhood and the beauty of that, through not being accepted anymore for who I was. Not what I was doing, but who I was.
Yeah.
Because when we are saying yes to our call as a soul on a journey, it's who we are
Yeah.
that's making the walk. And what we do is simply an expression of that. So I was rejected for who I was.
Yeah.
And that was big. I had to grieve that. But I was able to bring forward with me the powerful experiences and formation that I had because I understood that we're all on this journey. So I never had a stance against anything, even when
Yeah.
things like that happened, because we're all moving from fear into love. All of
Hmm.
us, like
I
nobody's
agree.
excluded.
Yeah.
So, so that happened in 2007. And since then, I've continued to grow and emerge in the multifaceted call that's mine, in all its forms, sessions, retreats,
Yeah.
books, talk.
That is beautiful. It is really interesting how we find ourselves within the walk, the journey. and how we respond based on people's um, acceptance or not of who we are. And it is painful, that transition when we there, because we're human, but the wisdom that we gain from it, it makes us uh, softer. And I love that. I love being softer in the sense where I was able, when I went through mine, my softness meant I was able to hold people in that space when they were there tighter, because I
Yeah.
understood what, um, while they're there, I understood that pain, and I was able to hold them and hug them and tell them, it's okay, you are greater than that. And there is a way out, and I will walk with you. And I learned much there. And that softness for me was the fact that I became sensitive, empathetic. I became more aware of pain, those type things, and became a little more loving, if you will. I remember I was working as a director for this assisted living facility, and here I was in my suit, and I was going through a divorce, and I was in pain, and I kept looking at the folks that were there, and as I began to identify with their pain and sat with them and hold them and walk with them, my pain was not there. I began to notice that it slowly, um, I wanted to spend more time with others, to begin to hug them and hold them. And I learned a tremendous amount, Kimberly, when I went through mine, because I remember looking at all the folks around me, and I realized, to a degree, we're all in pain. And so when I began to realize that, because of my personality, it was more, you know, boom, 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 boom. When I realized that we're all in a degree of pain to some degree, because we are being expanded more and more, that one must always walk in love, always walk in love, because everyone is in a degree of pain. And when we walk in love, we kind of have an opportunity to experience that, and it helps us heal as we're moving through. Here you are, you've gone through so much. You've morphed, you've changed, you have walked through pain, you've come out on the other side, and then you're standing there and this book. I mean, you
Mm.
went through this stuff years ago in building and watching all of the miracles and stuff like that. How did that book, that thought came back into you?
Well, it's interesting because I love what you just shared about yourself, and it really gives witness to the independent to interdependent, right?
Yeah,
Uh, One of the insights that non-verbally came to me when I was building the monastery was how immediate things are in the field of intelligence in which we walk. So we walk in this world, if you will, and the world is a pattern of energy, and that energy to me is infinite intelligence. And as we're walking available to it, surrender's an operative way we get there. As we walk available to it, it's all there at all times,
yeah,
all times. And back in 2014, I had made a move, and I was looking at my blueprints, and I was like, because I was the only memory keeper of that project. And I said, if I don't really write all this down, there's going to come a time when a lot of it's forgotten.
yeah,
Um, Now, it's remarkable how sharp my memory is, because I wrote a big manuscript, more than 600 pages back then.
Mm.
Then it wasn't time to revisit it or publish it. And I published a book in 2015 that leads to this book that just came out. But when I opened this book, this manuscript last summer, all the detail was there. I
Mm.
had 900 pages I turned into a publishing agency
Wow.
of stories of all the people, all the ways things synchronistically showed up, all the ways people were blown open and healed and transformed, all the ways the monastery came together. And I was able to cut it into two books. This book, Miracles in the Naked Light,
Mm.
and the third book will come out in a couple years. And then bring it down, kind of stir it until it reduced into what was meant
Yeah.
to come forward. But it is a living example of how available this field of intelligence is to us. If we open our minds and open our hearts, if we do small things that build the inner capacity to be available to the wisdom that we're walking in. And so it came about quite simply that way.
Yeah.
And I think that there are foundational messages for our Western psyche in there. You know, I posit that everything's grace. Well, gosh, that's really tricky, right?
Yeah.
To say that when people are struggling, there are so many challenges, there's so much uncertainty, and to just put that out there can seem like Pollyannic,
Mm-hmm.
right? You know, just like we're bypassing the reality, right? Well,
Yeah.
that's not
Yeah.
reality. But if you get really down and dirty with that, you can discover how everything is grace. And
Yeah.
this story plays that out for our world. It gives you an example that you can enter into by virtue of the me that's walking the journey, and then experience how your own life is kind of unfolding with those same increments, those same nudges, those same opportunities, and you can taste it. And then you get to taste some of the potential of your own being.
Yeah.
So I think it's very timely. Also, I've not sought this out, but for all these years I've been of service, I find that oftentimes I am the place where people heal the trauma they have around religion or religious experience, uh, where they've, been encouraged to accept something that's not true about themselves, or not been given the freedom to explore their truth. In young years, in later years, all the collective consciousness we have around that. And it's not my only focus, but I find unsolicited, I find myself oftentimes in that place of dramatic healing for people. Very similar to you. There's no place I can't go. I've
Yeah.
been to the depths of darkness individually and collectively.
Yeah.
So there isn't a place that's surprising to me. And being there in that place, people can discover that there is a beloved that is there with them even much more than I am. I'm just an instrument of
Yeah.
it.
I tell them when you my advice to people when they ask me about coaches and so forth, I would tell them find someone who's been through some stuff,
Mm,
been through some stuff, and
yeah,
not the ones that have gotten the paperwork and are one dimensional, have never experienced anything. They will never. They haven't. They are not aware of the questions that they need to ask you in order to get you from A to B. But the
yes,
person who has been through some stuff is very familiar with the terrain. And they will know what to ask you, what question to ask you to bring out the results that you need for your where you are right there. Because
yes,
they wish they had someone to ask that question when they went through
right.
it. And so they went through it so that you can benefit from their wisdom, their knowledge. And how do they express that? is by asking you a question. And I tell them, and I put this story to them. I said, Jesus is coming to this man. The Bible teaches us that this is one of the top teachers and sages. He's walking and he sees this man at this pool and he says to him, "Why are you there?" I love this stuff. This is so brilliant.
I was just reflecting on that. Yesterday.
He's like, "Why are you here?" And he says, "Well, you know, angel comes, stir the pool. I want to, and who gets in there gets healed." Jesus looks at him and says, "So what do you want?" He said, "I want to get healed. I want to get out of this place." So Jesus knew the questions to ask him
Yes.
to bring out from him what his desire, the root cause. Why are you here? And when he was able to express precisely what he wanted, he said, "Get up and walk." Go. And so that's what a coach, that's what a leader does, versus those that have gone into quote unquote the master class for 4 hours on a weekend and get a degree and think they are something. So I tell people, find the ones who have been through some stuff, who got some bruises on them. You will know them by just talking with them, and they will be able to guide you even from the simplest of conversations that you have with them. That's how you know. And so, all you guys that are listening to this podcast, and you know how I feel about authors, because their book is who they are. It houses wisdom. And when you are able, I try to tell people, I can get you in front of this person at a really cheap cost. And all you have to do, you have a one-on-one with them, and all it is the price of the book. And you sit down in the living room or your closet with your cup of tea or coffee or coconut water that I'm drinking, and you're able to have this one-on-one experience with that author, and those words have the capability to leap from that page and reside within you and spark something in you so that you can step out of your situation, get in touch with Kimberly so that she can be able to walk with you and experience and explain what just happened and guide you to the next level, to the next degree of you, so that you can get to see you. Her excitement is you. And so she wants you to see you, of how beautiful you are. And I have someone, guys, that is here that trained. She's been through some stuff. And I want you guys I want to introduce you guys to her. I'm going to provide all of her information so that you can have access to her, so that she can guide you. And I always say to you guys, buy the books, give it as presents to people, offer it to friends that you want to, they'll get a chance to see who they are. Those that are struggling with certain mindsets, get them these books and give them an opportunity to come out from where they're at so they can get into Kimberly's space so that she can educate them as to who they are. Kimberly, thank you so much for coming to Threads of Enlightenment. This has been beautiful.